The hospital bedroom was cold even with the heaters linked. Clara, just 8 years old, breathed with difficulty, her small lungs fighting time. Advanced leukemia consumed its forces day after day, and doctors, with tired looks, no longer offered words of optimism. The mother, Juliana, held her daughter's hand as who tries to arrest a soul about to leave. The corridors were silent that April afternoon except for the sound of the machines that monitored the girl's weak beats. The father, Carlos, walked nervously with hard and short steps. He had never been able to deal with fragility. He was a man of logic, an engineer used to fixing everything but the life that was dripping his fingers now. There's nothing to do anymore, the oncologist said that morning. Her organism no longer responds to treatments. Juliana, even devastated, refused to accept. He had resorted to prayers, promises, and even benzos indicated by acquaintances. All in secret from her husband. Deep down, still waiting for a miracle, not like movies or soap operas, but something real, even unlikely. A spark of life. One last breath. A sign. In one of the most difficult nights when Clara had a high fever and delusions, she muttered something that made her mother freeze. I wanted to embrace the strong bull of the farm, that big, beautiful, sad eyes. Juliana, confused, thought it was delirium. But Clara insisted the next day. He spoke of a bull he once turned on TV in a rural program. An animal named Hercules. And that was his last wish, to know and embrace that imposing bull. Clara was born on a rainy November morning, with large and curious eyes that seemed to absorb the world from the first moment. It was one of those children who asked everything, who were enchanted by the smallest things, a ladybug in the window, the sound of the rain on the roof, the smell of his grandmother's coffee. From an early age, the family noticed something different from her, a restless sweetness, as if he carried an ancient soul in a small body. At 5, Clara was already talking about feelings with the sensitivity of an adult. He designed animals with love and wrote affection tickets even for his postman. It had a collection of stuffed pets, but the favorite has always been a cloth bull named Leoncio. He protects me, he said. The grandmother said that Clara had a lot of sky in her eyes, an expression to describe people who were born to love more than living. When the diagnosis arrived, it was like a silent bomb. The girl began to present inexplicable tiredness, spontaneous bruises, and constant fevers. In less than 2 months, light childhood has been replaced by needles, exams, and hospitalizations. But even in pain, Clara smiled. He designed hearts on the sheets with his finger and thanked nurses with designs made with spent pens. The disease did not turn off its light, but overshadowed the brightness around. Parents, once happy, became shadows of themselves. The toy room was silent. The school, which she loved so much, sent videos from her colleagues singing songs to her. And yet, Clara didn't complain. When they asked how she was, she said, I'm waiting for the bull to visit me. It was as if, inside it, there was a certainty that that animal, seen briefly on TV, had a role to fulfill in its history. The sound of the door being gently closed was more cruel than a crash. The doctor, a gray man with sweet voice and eyes marked by years of difficult news, sat before Juliana and Carlos as one carries a sentence in her pocket. We have reached the therapeutic limit, he said carefully. Clara's organism is refusing to cooperate. The medication no longer responds. It's no longer a matter of medicine. It's a matter of time. Juliana arrested the air as who dives, waiting not to drown in the following words. Carlos, more practical, just lowered his head, swallowing dry, as if it were possible to digest the idea of losing his daughter with the same self-control with which he dealt with structural calculations at work. What followed was a deafening silence. The room, although filled with medical words and palliative protocols, was impregnated with the most cruel truth. There was nothing else to do. The next few days, or weeks, if they were fortunate, would be dedicated to keeping Clara comfortable. Without pain, the doctor promised, although they knew that the pain that would come was not physical but emotional, tearing pieces of the soul a little every hour. Juliana looked at her husband, seeking support, but found a wall. Carlos, rigid, did not allow pain to escape. He didn't cry, he didn't train. It was only there, immovable, like a spirit without spirit. That night Juliana didn't sleep. He was next to Clara, watching his daughter's chest up and down with difficulty, as if the air was becoming a rare visitor. He thought at all times that he ignored the signs, the promises he did not know if he could fulfill, and in the overwhelming fear of burying his own heart. Clara, in the midst of a light, feverish sleep, whispered once again, I wanted to hug the bull. That didn't get out of her mother's head. The image of a strong, large, perhaps dangerous animal, and such a small child, so fragile, asking for a gesture that seemed impossible, almost absurd. But at dawn, silent tears and desperate prayers, Juliana understood. If the daughter had so little time, then her desire came to be sacred. No matter the size of difficulty, risk, logic, or judgment. If Clara wanted to embrace a bull named Hercules, then that would be the mother's goal, to move heaven and earth to make that last request. Because when time runs out, the impossible ceases to exist. The next morning, as the sun was still trying to cross the opaque glass of the hospital window, Juliana walked away from Clara's bed carefully, as if she didn't wake up either sleep or hope. He walked to the waiting room where he met alone. The hospital, though full, seemed suspended in time. She pulled her cell phone with trembling hands, looking for something she didn't even know for sure. He wrote Bull Hercules Rural Program and began to scour videos and old reports until finally found him, a TV special 2 years ago filmed on a farm inside Goiás. There he was. A colossal, black, coat bull and back eyes, which had gained national fame for his docile behavior with children in an inclusion action for small disabilities. Clara must have seen this video at the time, perhaps during one of the long hospitalizations when only TV distracted from suffering. Juliana watched the whole story. The reporter praised the animal's calm, and the creator, a simple man named his Elijah, said Hercules was different from other bulls. He feels us, said the farmer, caressing the animal's neck with reverence. In a striking stretch, a blind girl hugged Hercules, who, instead of walking away, lowered her head and touched her muzzle delicately. Juliana shivered. That image had strength. More than a childhood memory, that could be the symbol of something larger, one last gesture, a cycle closure, a moment of peace before the end. But even moved by emotion, Juliana knew that convincing Carlos would not be easy. In the early afternoon, she touched the subject in a subtle way, almost like the water tests before diving. Clara really wants to see that bull, that on television. Remember? Carlos looked at her with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. Juliana, are you talking about taking a terminal child to hug a bull miles away? It's not time for fantasy. The words cut as a razor. She didn't answer. He just got up and left the room. Sometimes love was also stubbornness. The next day, Juliana made a silent decision. He took the car, made it clear with his grandmother at the hospital, and drove to the address of the farm he had found in the video. It was almost 7 hours on the road, crossing dry landscapes, forgotten villages, and 2 large horizons for those carrying so much pain in the chest. All the way, a single sentence echoed inside her: if it's the last thing I do for my daughter, let it be a hug with soul. Clara's desire, perhaps forgotten by many, now became the purpose of her mother. The farm was announced with an old wooden plate, worn out of time, Recanto Hope, property of Elias S. Martins. The gate was ajar, and in the distance, a vast pasture stretched under the reddish sky of the dusk. Juliana parked the car, her hands sweaty and her heart fast. I didn't know exactly what I would say or how it would be received, but I had an irrational faith that something in that land would respond to its despair. It was greeted by a simple pawn who led her to the porch of the main house, where a thin gentleman with a straw hat and calloused hands had coffee as if the time there was another rhythm. His Elijah was a man of meek speech but penetrating. When Juliana told her story, he didn't interrupt her once. Heard everything: the disease, the daughter's desire, the search for video, the lonely trip. When she ended, with teary eyes, he just sighed deep and responded with a short smile loaded with respect: Dona. If your girl wants to see Hercules, then she'll see. He got up, straightened his hat, and signaled with his hand so that the pawn would accompany him. Let's get him at the bottom of the property. He's been more prisoner lately. It's different. That word was in Juliana's mind. The path to the corral where Hercules was long and dusty. The sun was already saying goodbye, painting the fences and the trees of the trees. When they arrived, she saw him. Even at a certain distance, the animal's grandeur was chilling. His black body looked like a living sculpture, and his eyes had a depth that no camera had managed to capture. There was sadness in them. A kind of ancestral melancholy, as if the bull also knew human pain. Hercules was still, watching visitors with silent attention but without showing fear or aggressiveness. Juliana approached the fence gently, respecting that sacred space. Hi, Hercules. He whispered, as if talking to a sleeping child. The bull slowly stepped toward her. One step, but it was enough for tears to drain along his face. At that moment she was sure that animal was not common. His Elijah, with his hands in his pockets, watched silently. This animal has something I can't explain, girl. He murmured. But if he accepts his daughter, then you will see with your own eyes what we here call a miracle. And that night, Juliana slept in one of the farm rooms, determined Clara would come. And the impossible, finally, would be put to the test. 2 mornings later, the sky was clean as rarely seen in the capital. Juliana drove silently, clearly in the back seat, wrapped in a blue blanket and a wool cap hiding her head without hair. Carlos, won by the tiredness and insistence of his wife, had allowed the trip, although his expression was still of fear and disbelief. Juliana, however, didn't look back. I knew there were risks. He knew it was reckless to get Clara away from the hospital. But he knew above all that there were promises that could not break. And she had made one of her daughter with her heart in pieces but with a whole soul. Clara spent much of the journey in silence, looking out the window. His eyes accompanied the trees and posts as looking for signs on the way. The mother watched her in the rearview mirror, and at a given moment, the girl said, with a low and sweet voice, "I think he's waiting for me, Mom. I dreamed of him tonight. He was sad." Juliana smiled, fighting the knot in her throat. Maybe it was just her daughter's imagination, or maybe not. After all, she had learned that not everything that matters can be explained. Some feelings exist only to be lived. Upon arriving at the farm, they were greeted by their Elijah, who now looked less like a cattle breeder and another guardian of something sacred. He approached Clara gently, as who recognizes someone special. "You're the bull girl, right?" Clara nodded, smiling slightly. His eyes were more alive than in weeks. The old man reached out and helped her get out of the car carefully, as if she were made of porcelain. "So let's go there, girl. There's someone waiting for you in the back." And so, with slow steps and breathing with effort, Clara began her crossing to the place where hope, hitherto distant, really awaited her. The pasture crossing was slow but magical. Each step of Clara seemed to be pushed by something larger than herself. The pedestrians stopped what they were doing to observe it. Some took the hat. Others made the sign of the cross. It was as if everyone there knew that this meeting carried something rare, a moment that challenged time, science, and logic. As they approached the corral, silence fell like a cloak. And there, on the other side of the fence, was Hercules. Real, like a living statue. His eyes found Clara's, and the world, for a moment, seemed to stop. Clara's eyes shone in a way that Juliana hadn't seen for weeks. Seeing the bull before her, imposing as a living wall, but serene as an old monk, the girl squeezed her mother's hand tightly. "It's him, Mom." "It's himself," he said with an embargoed voice of emotion. Hercules was just a few meters, as if he already knew that this moment was different from everyone else. The pedestrians remained at a distance without daring to interrupt. His Elijah crossed his arms and murmured to himself, "He feels." He always felt. Clara took a step toward the fence. Her body, weakened by the disease, was shaking lightly, but there was an unexpected firmness in her walking, as if the earth itself propelled it. Hercules did not move immediately. Just looked at her, fixed eyes, as who recognizes something lost for a long time. And then, in a gesture that made Juliana take her hand to her mouth to contain the cry, the bull stepped ahead. Then another. Slow, heavy, but smooth as if stepped in glass. When he stopped before the fence, he slightly lowered his head, his eyes stuck in hers, and let out a deep breath, almost a sigh. Clara reached out. The pale fingers, thin like dry branches, crossed the fence's spaces and found the hot and rough muzzle of Hercules. At the touch, the bull closed his eyes. It was as if both were recognizing themselves speechless, as if time, pain, and distance between their existence had dissolved at that moment. Juliana felt her legs weaken. It wasn't just beautiful. It was sacred. That silent gesture said more than any speech, more than any medical report. There was something among them that transcended the visible. For long minutes, no one moved. Clara leaned her face in the fence as if she wanted to feel Hercules's breathing on her skin. The bull, in turn, remained motionless except for the slight movement of his chest as he breathed, as if he feared that any gesture could break that spell. "He doesn't do this to anyone," murmured one of the pawns in the background. "With no one." And that day, under the clear sky of Goya's, a sick girl and a giant bull sealed a silent pact, not of healing, no promise, but of pure connection between souls who, for some unfathomable reason, found themselves on the threshold between life and farewell. The following days seemed no longer obeying the normal rules of time. Clara and Hercules saw each other every morning, always at the same point of the fence. There were no words between them, just gestures, looks, and a presence that spoke for itself. The bull no longer left the surroundings of the back as if waiting for the girl daily. As she approached, he lifted his neck, took 2 steps slow, and greeted her with a deep breath as if to tell her, "I'm here." It was a different silence from those who do not oppress, but welcome. It was the kind of silence that only exists between souls who recognize themselves. Clara, increasingly weakened, seemed to have found a reason to continue waking up. Although their exams did not show big changes yet, his gaze was alive. She drew the bull every day in makeshift papers, always with huge, sad eyes, but with a red heart in the center of the chest. "He also has a sick heart, Mom." But he is still standing, he said, as who understood much more than he said. Juliana realized that her daughter no longer spoke for fear of death, she spoke with the wisdom of those who are learning to die in peace. His Elijah watched everything with eyes from those who have seen too much in his life, but never that. This animal has the gift of silence, he said. He listens to what no one says. Some farm officials began reporting changes in Hercules's behavior. He was no longer frightened by thunder nor reacted with irritation to the sounds of tractors. It seemed calm, meditative. He slept by the fence where Clara visited him, how to protect that space. For many it was just coincidence. For others an inexplicable phenomenon. But for Juliana that was what was left of incarnate faith in the form of an animal. On an especially hot afternoon, Clara arrived on the fence without the strength to stand. He was carried on his lap by Juliana, who settled her in a chair next to the corral. Hercules approached slowly and, for the first time, lay before her. It was an unprecedented gesture. A bull of that size was never vulnerable, especially before humans. But he was there, his head close to the floor, his eyes fixed on Clara in a silence that seemed to contain the universe. At that moment, mother and daughter understood that there was more between heaven and land than they could explain. And sometimes the silence between two worlds is worth more than 1,000 prayers. The day dawned differently. The sky, though clear, seemed slower, as if time decided to walk more carefully that morning. Clara had spent the night between fevers and dreams, whispering disconnected words and the name of Hercules as a prayer. When the sun touched the porch of the house where they were staying, Juliana realized that her daughter's eyes were more opaque than ever. There was a stillness in it that was not tired, it was farewell. And it was there that Juliana understood it was today. There would be no tomorrow. If the hug the daughter wanted so much had to happen, it was now. Before it was too late. SCU Elijah, seeing the girl in her mother's arms, did not question. It only opened the side gate that gave direct access to the corral. The pedestrians looked at each other, insecure, but none dared to contest. Hercules, who was already in the shadow of a tree, rose as if he had been called by an invisible force. Its hoofs touched the earth with strange respect, almost solemn. He walked to the center of the surrounding and stopped. Waited. Juliana, with her heart tight, crossed the gate with Clara in her arms, feeling the weight of her lighter daughter than ever, as if the girl was already fading between the worlds. As he approached the bull, Juliana knelt carefully. Clara, semi-macment, raised her head with effort and murmured, "He's here." His little arm came under the blanket and, with what was left of strength, she stretched, seeking the animal's massive neck. Hercules lowered slowly. And then, as if obeyed a silent and old call, he bent until his head leaned against the girl's chest. Clara involved the bull in a fragile but full hug. And at that moment, the world stopped. There was no wind, no sound. Only the beating of the heart of a bull and the sigh relieved of a child who finally found what he was looking for, a home between ribs that were not human. Juliana did not contain the cry. He cried like a mother who witnesses the impossible. He cried for the pain, the beauty, the injustice, and the blessing of that moment. The pedestrians, even the most rude, lowered the hats. His Elijah walked away, wiping his eyes discreetly. And Clara, with her eyes closed and a slight smile on her lips, whispered only, "Now I can rest." But it wasn't a goodbye. Not at that moment. The miracle had not yet manifested, but something there, in that hug, had changed the course of what everyone thought irreversible. Because there are gestures that do not heal the body, but save the soul. That same night, silence fell over the farm like a sacred cloak. Clara slept deeply, with her face serene for the first time in a long time. Juliana remained awake beside her daughter, listening to her slow breathing, mesmerized by a peace that has not been seen since before the illness. Outside, the moon illuminated the pasture where Hercules remained standing, exactly at the point where it was hugged. He did not lay down, did not feed, did not emit any sound, just remained there like an immovable guardian. It was as if he was still in connection with something invisible, with the soul of a fragile girl who had inexplicably returned her silence of pain. The next morning, even before the sun rises, Clara woke up. And not just woke up, I was awake. His eyes shone, his voice was firmer, and the first gesture he made was asking for bread with butter. Juliana took time to sue. The daughter, who until the day before she could barely talk, was now sitting, eating as if she were in her grandmother's backyard. The body still showed signs of fragility, but there was something different. A new vibration. The heat in the cheeks, the firm tone of speech. And when his Elijah appeared to see how they were, Clara ran to him, clinging on her legs with the same joy as a healthy child. The old man, seeing her like that, staggered with emotion. Hours later, still astonished, Juliana called the hospital and explained the situation. The doctor in charge asked them to return immediately to new exams, although he has already ended any treatment. On the way back, Carlos, who had received videos from her daughter standing and smiling, was in shock. As he met her, he could not resist, collapsed. The girl jumped into her arms and he fell to his knees, crying like a child. "I thought I had lost you," he repeated, unable to stop repeating. And Clara, with the thin arms around her father's neck, said, "It was the bull, Daddy. He gave me a little bit of his heart." The exams started the same day. And that's when the doctors were unanswered. The rate of sick cells had plummeted. The blood showed a sudden regeneration. The previously committed liver was restoring. It made no sense. No protocol, no experimental treatment, nothing explained that. One of the hematologists mumbled perhaps it was a mistake in previous exams. But everyone knew it wasn't. Something had happened. Juliana just smiled, wiped a tear, and said calmly, "Sometimes science needs to kneel before what you don't understand." The hospital waiting room, usually drowned out by cries, coughs, and empty looks, that day exhaled something different: astonishment. Clara's early exams returned to the laboratory with rates that not only disagreed with her previous picture but completely challenged clinical logic. The medical team, accustomed to rigid protocols and statistical predictability, was faced with a biological riddle. Cancer cells, which once dominated more than 80% of the bone marrow, had drastically regressed in less than 72 hours. There was no reference for that. No remedy, therapy, or transplant would be able to produce such an immediate and intense response. It was as if the disease had retreated on its own will. Chief hematologist Dr. Enrique Lisboa asked to repeat all exams. He was a skeptical man, respected for his precision and coldness in the face of terminal cases. "Let's discard any technical error," he said, while a team collected new blood materials, feces, and urine. On the same day, they performed a lumbar puncture, a delicate and painful procedure that, surprisingly, Clara calmly endured, just asking them to put the song she listened to while drawing Hercules. The environment, however clinical it was, seemed influenced by the girl's serenity, as if fear had been replaced by serene and unshakable confidence. When the new results came, hours later, confirmation came as a blow to the natural order of things. Clara was in spontaneous remission. Not a gradual improvement. Not a partial reaction. It was an aggressive setback of the disease, an inexplicable restructuring of sick cells. Dr. Enrique himself, after personally checking out each report, entered the room where Juliana and Carlos were waiting with wide eyes and her voice. "If I hadn't seen the previous tests, I would say this girl never had leukemia." And for the first time in many years of profession, he cried before a patient. Carlos, still trying to sue, began to repeat to himself, "It is not possible. It is not possible." Juliana, with Clara sleeping in her lap, just swung her head, smiling with wet eyes. She didn't need to understand. I did not want to decipher the mystery nor turn the miracle into an academic thesis. For her, it was enough to accept. Because some answers are not found in microscopes but in the unlikely meetings that life allows us, like that of a girl dying and a bull who did not speak but healed with silence. The hospital auditorium was improvised as an emergency meeting room. Sector heads, associated researchers, residents, and representatives of a partner university were gathered there. Clara, who still remained hospitalized for observation, had become the object of involuntary study, a phenomenon that challenged whole books of hematology. The data were all there, designed in charts, tables, and reports. The before and after was scandalous. There was no plausible medical explanation. No identifiable substances in the body, no known mutation, no experimental protocol had been applied. "What we are seeing is a case of extremely rare spontaneous remission," said Dr. Enrique, looking at the projection with a frown. But even he didn't completely believe what he said. Some colleagues began to raise hypotheses. Environmental factors, emotional change, a possible statistical error, or even contamination in the exams. "We may have confused the collection tubes," suggested a resident. Immediately, the room was divided between those who sought explanations and those who only repeated, "This cannot be right." But the samples were tagged correctly. The analyses were made by 3 different laboratories, all with the same result. And the most disconcerting of all, Clara's body reflected exactly the data on the papers. She was better. Stronger. I slept well, ate, laughed, walked. The disease was, for some reason no one understood, disappearing. Dr. Enrique, on an impulse that mixed honesty with arrogance, stated, "Perhaps we should consider the psychological factor." And then Juliana, who was present with Clara on her lap, intervened. In a firm voice, without aggressiveness but full of conviction, he said, "My daughter has not healed cancer with positive thinking, doctor. She hugged a bull." And since that day she just started to go back to life. The room fell in a heavy silence. That phrase, dictated with simplicity and faith, exposed the arrogance of a science that often refuses what it cannot control. Juliana's gaze was not a challenge. It was mother. A mother who saw the impossible happen to her own eyes. Carlos, next to his wife, remained silent. Still locked between the world that always believed to know and the new universe that had opened before his eyes. He was a man of engineering, reason, of exact measures. But now there, in front of his own daughter, smiling with a pencil in his hand and the name Hercules scribbled in dozens of leaves, something inside it began to give in. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the fear. But for the first time he looked at the doctor and asked, what if? What if she received something we couldn't measure? No one answered. Because at that moment, the only certainty was this: Clara challenged everything that was known about disease, healing, and destiny. It started with a nurse. He posted, without thinking twice, a picture of Clara walking down the hospital corridor with a bull drawing in her hands. The caption was simple but touching: when medicine gives up, love continues. In a few hours, the image went viral. Shared by profiles of mothers, religious pages, alternative medicine forums, and independent journalists, the story of Clara and the mysterious bull named Hercules came out of anonymity and was read, commented, and debated by thousands of people. At first it was seen with skepticism and curiosity. But as the details came to light, the exams, the medical historic, the girl's videos already without strength and then walking alone, the story gained body. And like every story with soul, she found room to flourish. The following week, the small town where the farm was located began to receive unusual visits: journalists, cameramen, spiritual bloggers, curious, and even religious leaders. Everyone wanted to see Clara. Everyone wanted to see Hercules. But his Elijah, faithful to his simplicity, kept his doors closed. This is not a circus, he told a reporter who tried to climb the corral without permission. This animal is not a miracle of showcase. And this girl, she is not holy, is just a child with more light than normal. Even so, it was impossible to contain the wave. The country wanted to believe. And Clara, with her sweet voice and colorful drafts, began to play hearts distant with the same lightness with which she had touched the muzzle of a bull. Juliana, now at the center of a media storm, was divided between protecting her daughter and understanding what was happening. He saw people camp outside the hospital. He saw reporters cry as he interviewed her. He even saw priests, pastors, and a Buddhist monk ask to visit Clara just to be close to her. And Clear, not understanding the grandeur of what he had caused, just smiled. I just wanted to hug him, Mom, he said as he showed a new drawing, she and Hercules under a tree surrounded by stars. Carlos, who once hidden behind rationalism, now spent the nights reading everything he found about connections between humans and animals. He wanted to understand. But with each page turned, he understood that perhaps it was not to be understood, just meaning. In the city, trade began to sell T-shirts with the phrase "strength like Hercules" and keychains with drawings made by Clara. The mayor, pressured by public commotion, declared a commemorative date, the Day of Hope, in honor of the girl. They chose the same day of the hug. And then, as in a movie script that goes from the intimate to the collective, the story of a sick girl and a silent bull began to occupy national news. Not for sensationalism, but because in times of chaos, people still look for miracles, and Clara was one of them. At first it was just a few cars standing on the dirt road, with families looking from afar, trying to see beyond the fences. But in a few days it has become something out of control. Hundreds, then thousands of people went to the Recanto Esperanza farm in search of the miracle bull. They came from every corner of the country, some in makeshift pilgrimages, some in vans chartered by churches or spiritualist groups. They brought flowers, posters, plush dolls, candles, and even holy water. Many kneeling before the corral. Others tried to touch the fence as if there was a divine spark there. The farm, once a place of silence and nature, was now a disorganized and noisy altar. His Elijah, who had always lived simply, was surrounded by cameras, drones, pastors with microphones, businessmen offering partnerships, and people who just wanted a minute with the animal. They tried to offer money to enter. They tried to corrupt pedestrians. A man tried to climb the fence and was almost trampled by one bull from the other bay. These people go crazy, said the old man, without raising his voice, but with tired eyes. They didn't come to seek faith. They came to look for a spectacle. The fame, which had not been ordered or planned, now threatened to corrupt the essence of that sacred meeting between Clara and Hercules, a meeting that had been done in silence, with respect and pain. Juliana, seeing what was happening, tried to intercede. He asked the press to retreat, to respect his daughter's health. But it was late. Social networks were boiling. Videos of Clara circulated playing the bull, theories about animal energy frequency, discussions between skeptics and religious. Meanwhile, Hercules began to get uneasy. It no longer approached the fence as before. He spent more time lying down, turning his face whenever someone shouted his name. It was as if the excess of eyes and expectations were hurting him. The animal which once carried the piece of the miracle now seemed to carry the weight of human projection. Clara felt it before everyone. One day when he arrived at the farm, he refused to go to the corral. He's sad, Mom. They're using him for things he doesn't understand. And then sitting on the porch, looking at the field with two adult eyes for a girl of her age. His Elijah approached, sat beside him and was silent. After a while, he murmured, "There is something that only happens in the dark, girl. Miracle is seed. When we show too much, it doesn't grow anymore." Clara just nodded. "You knew." "I felt." And then he asked, "Can you close the farm for a few days? Leave him in peace?" And for the first time since it all started, the old man said yes without thinking. Because sometimes protecting the sacred is more important than showing it to the world. The announcement was made on a cloudy morning. Your Elijah put a simple sign at the entrance of the farm: property closed indefinitely, respect silence. There was no collective, there was no explanation. The news spread as a dry straw fire. In less than 24 hours, news portals stamped out indignant headlines: silenced miracle, farm forbids visitation to the bull that healed girl, mystery surrounded, why hide Hercules, family prevents population from accessing sacred animal. What was commotion became a charge. Reporters invaded the dirt road, helicopters flying over the scene, influencers demanded transparency. And in the blink of an eye, the story that had begun like a breath of faith was now consumed by voices that wanted ownership of what was never theirs. Juliana was called the manipulator. They accused her of exploring her daughter to get donations which she had never asked. They said that Carlos, an engineer, should be profitable with the public interest. They created theories that Hercules had been trained for the miracle, which Clara was never really sick, that it was all a theater. And while the adults disputed narratives, Clara watched everything from afar, silent every day. "They are screaming too much to hear what really happened, right, Mom?" said one day, calmly drawing the outline of a tree on a folded sheet. Juliana squeezed her lips and did not answer. Because she herself was beginning to feel ashamed, not by protecting her daughter, but for living in a world that confuses faith with a spectacle. His Elijah, who had hitherto kept his calm temperament, lost patience when a drone broke into the corral and scared the cattle. He called the police, expelled 2 journalists forcibly, and had the fence with solid wood reinforced. "There is no show here. This is ground. It's land and animal in silence. Who doesn't know how to pray in silence to leave?" And yet they continued to come. Tents were set up by the roadside. People slept in the car, hoping to see Clara or listen to the bull's mug. It was as if, when denying access, the farm had become even more powerful, as if the saved silence became legend. And nothing, Mr. Victor, is more dangerous than a loose legend in a world desperate for meaning. Carlos, pressured by colleagues and the media, wanted to give an interview to calm his spirits. Juliana opposed. Clara, sitting next to them, looked at her father and said only, "Let them scream, Daddy. The bull knows where to find me." And with that sentence he sealed what they feared most: the purity of the miracle was being torn. Not for the lie, but for the greed of the look. And then, for the first time since the hug, Juliana was afraid. Not of death. Not of the disease. But that the world destroyed what, for a moment, had been perfect, a pure gesture between 2 beings who only wanted silence. Carlos has always been a man of certainties. It has grown by learning that emotion is something that hinders, that faith is a cane to the weak, and that the world only respects those who think with logic. Civil engineer, he formed between calculations, technical standards, and steel. He never liked improvisation or poetry. He married Juliana because she was the opposite: sensitive, intuitive, guided by the heart. And for a long time, this contrast worked. But when Clara's illness arrived, the floor where Carlos stepped in collapsed. He tried to rationalize, organize the reports, set up chemotherapy spreadsheets, medicine schedules, create graphs with blood rates. But the truth is that it all escaped from it like sand between the fingers. And when doctors told him that there was nothing else to do, Carlos broke, only in silence. In the early days of terminal post-diagnosis, Carlos isolated himself. "I spent hours in front of the computer, pretending to work, but with the screen locked on the same page. I couldn't pray. I couldn't cry. Let alone accept." When Juliana spoke in faith, he was silent. When she told about Clara's desire to know the bull, he found it absurd. "Why spend energy on an illusion?" he said, without realizing the cruel weight of those words. but something inside him was already starting. A different, corrosive silence was beginning to infiltrate the cracks of his pride. And like every man who denies pain, Carlos began to accumulate guilt. The day he received the video of Clara standing, running on the farm, was like a slap. He watched in looping, not knowing if he laughed, cried, or shouted. That girl who he had helped to carry from the hospital, now he walked as if his time had returned. When she saw her personally, her world collapsed. There was no logic. There was no equation. There was just that hug, that smell of children's hair, and her whisper saying, "The bull gave me courage, Daddy." For the first time in life, Carlos felt small. Less than a report. Less than a gesture of affection. And that night, when everyone slept, he locked himself in the bathroom and cried to sob. Not out of sadness, but because finally he allowed himself to feel. From that day, something changed in Carlos. He started drawing with Clara. He researched nonverbal communication between humans and animals. Read about electromagnetic fields, heart rate, about biological empathy. He also tried to find a rational hook and anchor. But deep down he knew. It wasn't just science. It was love. It was a connection. It was something he would never learn in a book. And then, on a silent afternoon, while Clara slept on her lap, he murmured, "Daughter, Daddy doesn't believe in miracles. But you made me believe you. And that for me is enough." And there at that moment, the concrete man surrendered to the invisible. His name was Augustus, but everyone called him Goodo. Veterinarian in the region for over 20 years, he knew every animal of those lands as part of the family. He was a practical man of a few words, always with the pants, dirty hay and smell of corral on the skin. Apart from him who had accompanied the birth of Hercules in a rainy dawn that almost took the calf along with his mother. It was Goodo who held the animal's life in his arms, still covered with mud, and since then there was a silent bond between the two. Hercules has never been easy. It was angry, temperamental. But with Goodo she never reacted badly. It was as if recognized him. Goodo was never religious. He had lost his young faith when his younger brother died in his arms during a tractor accident. Since then he has dealt with death with the coldness of those who learned that the world gives no chance. But when he first saw Clara, backed by the fence, so small in front of that colossal bull, something inside him trembled. When the girl touched Hercules and he didn't back up, Goodo felt a knot in his throat he tried to disguise with a throat clearing. He thought it was emotion of the moment, a coincidence, a theater of life. But the following days denied any skepticism. The bull changed. And Goodo too. One night, after everyone retreated, Goodo went to the corral. He brought apples to Hercules as he always did. The animal was standing but did not approach immediately. He looked at the porch of the house where Clara slept as if she could feel her presence at a distance. Goodo leaned against the fence, leaned his forehead in the wood and sighed. It was the first time in years that he felt like praying. "I don't know what you have, animal, but thanks." The voice embarked. "She reminds me of Taiguin Ho, my brother, so small, so full of shine." And then, as one surrenders to what cannot name, Goodo cried. He cried as he didn't cry from the funeral. And Hercules approached, lowered his head, and stayed there as if he understood. The next day, Goodo said nothing to anyone. He continued his work as always, but his eyes now had another weight. From time to time he ran his hand on Hercules's muzzle more carefully. She sat near Clara with a shy affection. It was no longer just the vet. He was a redone man inside. That bull, that girl, had touched something inside him that no surgery, medicine, or prayer had reached before. And so, in the shadow of a miracle of others, Goodo found his own way back to life. Few knew, and almost no one wondered, but before being the miracle bull, Hercules had just another animal in the middle of the cattle, raised not for affection but to strength. From an early age, he stood out for his huge size and restless temperament. Still young, he was sold to a breeding farm where he spent years being forced to cross with dozens of cows a week in a pressure environment without human contact other than domination. There, Hercules was trained with shouts, strings, and sometimes shock. A bull was not a being, it was a genetic multiplication machine. And in that gross logic, he almost lost what made him unique, sensitivity. Trauma shaped him. When he was bought by his Elijah for a price below the market for unpredictable behavior, he arrived at Recanto Esperanza farm with his eyes marked. Not physically, but with a different look. A deep, defensive void that caused discomfort even in the most experienced pawns. He refused approximating, aggressively reacted to touches, and remained isolated hours. At first they wanted to sell it again. But Elijah, driven by something he didn't even explain, decided to keep him. "Leave the animal in peace, there is soul injured inside," said Goodo once. And that's how Hercules gained space, time, and silence. Without demand. Without function. Just being. Over the years, the bull has changed. He began to tolerate Elijah's presence after Godot. One day, he let a special child with Down syndrome approach without showing any sign of stress. It was the first time that something different has seen in his eyes, a kind of silent tenderness. From that day on, Elijah forbade any attempt to cross or competition. This animal is not to assemble nor to display. He is for those who need peace. But no one imagined the size of what would come. Hercules still carried the scars of the past, but also the rare ability to recognize pain in the other. This is what made him recognize Clara. Not as a threat, but as a mirror. Juliana learned of the story in a conversation by the corral while watching Clara draw. Elijah told him calmly as who reveals an old secret. And then she understood. The connection between the two was not mystical by chance, it was mutual recognition of pain, one wounded soul embracing another. Clara, so young, carried the marks of cruel cancer on her body. Hercules, so strong, brought in his soul the trauma of abuse. And together, in the silence of a gesture that no one knew how to predict, one healed what in the other had been torn. Not by words, not by science, but for something that only time, love, and pain share, a memory of survival. It was in the second week after Clara's recovery that Dr. Cesar Dantes's name began to circulate between the hospital corridors and the research groups. Biologist, neuroscientist, and field researcher, Caesar was known for both his discoveries and boldness in questioning traditional limits of science. He had already published articles on emotional influence between humans and animals, studied heart reactions between dogs and autistic children, and a controversial thesis on the impact of electromagnetic vibrations on healing environments. When he read about Clara and Hercules, something aroused him more than curiosity. "There is a pattern here," he said, "and I want to see you closely." With permission from the hospital and veiled resistance of some doctors, Dr. Cesar traveled to the farm. It brought with it discrete equipment, heart rate sensors, biomagnetic field detectors, and thermal cameras. His reluctant Elijah only accepted because Clara asked. "He wants to understand, I go, Elias. We can show without ruining," he said, with the calm wisdom that only children in peace know. For 3 days, the researcher monitored the meetings between Clara and Hercules. He watched the girl's heartbeat stabilize whenever she approached the bull. He noticed the thermal variation of Hercules' body to the child's touch. And he saw something he had never witnessed, the electromagnetic fields of both synchronized for whole minutes, something that, in theory, only occurred between mothers and children. The data were recorded, analyzed, crossed. And although science did not easily accept the word miracle, the numbers did not lie. Caesar then formulated a hypothesis that would cause discomfort in academia. Shared emotional bioenergy between living beings may have a deep therapeutic effect. According to him, Clara and Hercules would have formed such a rare energy bond that it caused a chemical reaction in the girl's immune system. The affection, when sincere, has electric strength. And sometimes it is this electricity of love that reprograms life. He said this in front of a small audience of doctors, some shocked, some ironic. But no one could ignore a simple truth: the girl was alive. And the bull, next to her, also seemed to have reborn. Juliana heard everything in silence. When they asked her what she thought of such an emotional bioenergy theory, she responded with a calm, almost maternal smile. "If you want to call the electromagnetic field, call. I call affection. I call resonance, vibration, neurochemistry." But it all started with a hug. And the last time I saw a hug save someone was the day my daughter didn't give up. And with that, the discussion was in the background. Because, regardless of the name or graphs, what everyone knew, deep down, albeit in silence, was that something there was real. And if it was real, then it deserved respect. It was not overnight. Clara's body still carried the features of the fight, the fine skin, the absent hair, the fragile fingers that sometimes trembled. But there was something new in his footsteps: firmness. When walking to the corral, now in the morning and without help, Juliana realized something that made her heart squeeze with a mixture of fear and gratitude. Her daughter was coming back to life, little by little. And with her, there was also a part of the mother who had been buried by nights of despair. Clara laughed more, was hungry, wanted to get out of bed. He asked to visit the calves, hummed invented melodies, and scribbled stories with colored pencil. Every day, a piece of childhood cancer had stolen was returned to him, not for medications, but out of affection, beaten ground, and silence next to Hercules. The doctors, still underway, were still intrigued. The exams, although still showing remnants of the disease, followed in constant improvement. The previously overloaded organs were regenerating. The previously unstable platelets now had consistency. One of the most experienced doctors, when analyzing the girl's history, muttered to herself, "She should have been dead for a month." But Clara was alive. More than live, it was present. In the look, there was focus. In the voice, firmness. And the most impressive was the bond that remained with the bull. Every morning, when approaching, Hercules rose as if waiting and remained motionless next to her for minutes. There was no command, there was no trick. It was complicity in a gross state. Carlos, once so absorbed in seeking explanations, began to allow himself only to observe. She was sitting next to the fence with a cup of coffee, looking at her daughter, an animal, as if she witnessed something she didn't want to disturb thoughts. "There is something we just understand being quiet," said Juliana in one of these mornings. And she, with teary eyes, just agreed. Guto, the veterinarian, also noticed small improvements in Hercules. The bull had eaten more, appetite again, to walk more loosely through the pasture, to demonstrate more vivid reactions. It was as if Clara healed him as much as he to her. A silent cycle of reciprocity, as if one were treating the invisible wounds of the other. And then, on a golden sunny afternoon, something simple happened, but it caused an earthquake in the hearts of those who witnessed. Clara ran. Did not walk. Ran. From the corral to the porch, with his legs still fragile, his arms open, laughing. Juliana shouted, thinking she would fall. But Clara stopped on the pillow, panting, and opened a torn smile. "I felt the wind, Mom. I felt him on my legs. That was not in the exams. Not in the graphics. But in that laugh, in that race, in that invisible wind that only she felt, was the greatest proof of all. Hope, when cultivated with love, has legs. And runs." What began as admiration and national commotion gradually began to transform. The story of Clara and Hercules, now known as Millions, is no longer just a narrative of hope and began to awaken something less noble, jealousy. In social networking groups, subtle comments began to emerge. "Why not my son?" they said. "Is it really true? It's not fair. There's a child dying without a bull hug." What was once a miracle became a debate. The miracle is no longer universal and became possessed of one girl, and that, for many broken hearts, hurt more than the disease itself. Some parents of sick children have written outraged letters to the hospital and even to the farm. "We want our children to see the bull too," they demanded. Everyone deserves a chance. The media, always hungry for tension, began to explore this new aspect. Interviews came up with mothers in mourning, wondering if Clara's family was not being selfish in preventing others from having access to Hercules. They tried to confront Juliana in front of the hospital. A reporter even asked, "If your daughter was saved, why not allow other children to have the same opportunity?" Juliana, with tears in her eyes, just answered, "Because that's not a formula. It was a date. And meetings like that don't replicate like recipes." The truth is that behind the collective commotion there was a collective pain too, and pain, when it finds no relief, becomes judgment. Some accused the family of lying. Others claimed that everything was a staging for fundraising, even though they had never requested donations. They created pages to unmask the miracle, posted old images of Clara, decontextualized stretches from the interviews. Even his Elijah was called a charlatan for a sensational report. And in the middle of it all, Clara began to feel. Not physically, but energetically. "They are screaming again, Mom," she said one morning, looking tired. "They are pushing the wind that we ran." His Elijah once again decided to act. He had siding sides around the corral. It limited the entrance even to journalists. Guto reinforced the safety of the gate. Carlos, formerly silent, wrote an article on his professional profile defending his daughter's right to silence and privacy, and viralized. But even with the defenses raised, the crowd did not retreat. Because, deep down, what cannot be explained cannot be controlled either. And Clara, so young, understood more than any adult around her. The miracle that saved it was like a rare seed. It only flourished if it was not touched by impatient fingers. It was on a muffled afternoon, shortly after the new siege was raised around the corral, that the first formal invitation arrived. It was a letterhead sent by an international foundation specialized in animal-assisted therapies. The proposal was clear: buying Hercules. They offered a truck with special structure, air transport, a farm with exclusive pasture, and lifetime veterinary treatment. In return, the bull would join a large-scale emotional cure program, visiting children in hospitals and being a symbol of a new therapeutic approach. He signed the director with compliments to Clara and history as a symbol of an age of reunion between science and sensitivity. But between the lines, the message was evident: we want to turn the miracle into a product. Your Elijah didn't even finish reading. He needed the contained angry card, and through the wood stove, where the flame swallowed the roll as quickly as he decided, "It's not for sale." But that was just the first attempt. In the following days came entrepreneurs, NGOs, TV producers, a foreign documentary team, and even a brand of natural supplements that wanted to use the image of Hercules in advertising campaigns. All with the same intention: turn a pure gesture into a symbol of consumer, marketing, and reach. The values offered were very high. They promised renovations on the farm, school for Clara, state-of-the-art veterinary equipment. But none of them saw the essentials. What had happened there could not be transported or reproduced. It was of invisible roots. Juliana, when consulted, was firm. If Hercules get out of here, he dies. And if he dies, a part of Clara dies with him. Carlos, who for years lived from calculation and reason, was now the first to refuse offers, often with harsh words. My daughter is not a campaign. And what saved it doesn't fit in a spreadsheet. But the most moving was clear. Listening to the proposals, he asked for time with Hercules. He sat next to the fence and, with his face glued to the wood, said softly, "They don't understand, right? They want to take you away. But I promise I won't let me go. I will stay with you too." And then, that same night, Elijah gathered all the employees and Doug, "From today, Hercules is listed by me. Not by law, but by honor. Those who dare accept proposal behind will be dismissed. This animal is from the land and the girl. And the soul of a miracle is not sold." No one disputed. Because there, more than a bull, there was a truth that no money could buy. The truth that what is pure is not negotiated. If you guard yourself, respects, protects itself with silence. Clara was never shouting. His presence was one of those who calm environments, even on the darker days. But all silence has a limit. And hers was crossed when, on a seemingly quiet afternoon, he saw two strange men walking down the side of the farm with clipboards and cameras, photographing the surroundings as if they were owners of the place. One of the pedestrians broke out, but they claimed to be conducting a technical study for a future readjustment project. Clara heard that from the porch. His eyes narrowed. She descended with slow but firm steps, crossed the courtyard, and placed herself between the two men and the fence where Hercules rested. "Get out of here," he said. The low voice carried a power that silenced to the wind. The men laughed, one of them with condescension. "You are the girl, right? Rest assured, this will be good for everyone. We are thinking big. You don't want more children to be healed like you, do you?" And that's when Clara exploded. "I was healed because he stayed here. Because no one sent him. Because he heard me. You don't want to heal anyone. You just want to take from him what he has, and when they take, he will erase inside. The same did me in the hospital before I came here." Her eyes burned. And for the first time, Juliana, who had been running to hear the screams, saw in her daughter something that seemed ancient, the fury of those who protect absolute love. The pawns approached and removed the men from the ground. But Clara didn't calm down. He spent the rest of the afternoon sitting next to Hercules, talking to him low, angry still present, as who apologizes for not having prevented before. Juliana tried to comfort her, but the girl was restless, and for the first time in a long time she cried not in fear or pain but of indignation. They think everything has to be divided. That everything has to become something. But what happened here can't be repeated, Mom. I know that. It was just ours, and then, exhausted, fell asleep next to the fence with the bull lying a few meters like a silent guardian. That night the whole farm understood that Clara was no longer just the girl of the miracle. It was the guardian of the sacred. His fury was not childish, it was fair. It was a natural defense against the corrosion of the external world. And Elijah, who had seen generations pass through that land, said only one sentence in the lamplight: "When even a child screams, it is because adults forgot what is right." And no one had the courage to contradict. Because that night the girl who healed with hugs also taught everyone that love, when she is true, also knows how to lift her voice. The sky dawned gray, with loaded clouds moving lazily over the fields. There was no rain yet, but the air carried that silence that only precedes the storms, not just those of the climate, but those of the soul. Clara woke up later than usual. Juliana noticed her daughter's breathing a more dragged pace, as if every inspiration required a hidden effort. She didn't complain, didn't speak of pain, but her eyes, they were different. There was an opacity that Juliana recognized well, the same as before the farm, on the days when Clara floated between the present and the invisible limit of the match. The mother's heart squeezed. Something was wrong. In the late morning, when Clara finally asked to go to the fence, she needed support. The steps were trembling. SCU Elijah, seeing her, did not disguise the concern. Guido was called, not as a veterinarian, but as someone who knew how to listen without judging. Clara came to Hercules, who was already waiting for her. She didn't say much. He just leaned his head around his neck and stood there, silent. The bull, which always responded with soft movements, this time remained motionless. And then, suddenly, a migrated strong echoed, not of pain, but of alert, as if announced something no one could still name. And at that moment, Clara fainted in her mother's arms. The hospital was triggered. Carlos has in a hurry, his pale face holding the latest exams that already indicated instability. The doctors spoke of late reaction, possible relapse, immunological fluctuation. But no explanation was enough. The devices showed heart changes, a slight respiratory impairment, an inexplicable drop in white blood cells. It was as if the body, after flourishing against all expectations, begins now to retreat again, like a flower sensitive to the sudden touch of the world. Juliana, holding the hand of her daughter, already hospitalized, whispered between sobs, "She was so well." "Why?" On the farm, Hercules stopped eating. I was immovable for hours, fixed eyes on the horizon, ignoring any stimulus. Godot tried to approach him, but the bull didn't even lift his head. It was as if he knew how to feel. The connection between the two, forged in pain and silence, seemed to be being pulled again to the abyss. And then the unspoken question arose: did the world, in its craving for deciphering the miracle, violate its mystery? Perhaps the sacred link was undoing, not at their will, but by the weight of the hands that tried to turn love into product, silence into headline, hug into a show. In the next morning, the hospital dived in a tense silence, interrupted only by the rhythmic whistle of the machines. Clara had been sedated after a sudden respiratory crisis, her small body fighting once again against something the exams did not explain yet. The nervous doctors spoke of aggressive return of the disease, perhaps triggered by extreme stress. Juliana, sitting next to her bed, was not crying. She had passed the point of tears. Her eyes were fixed on her daughter, her fingers intertwined with hers as if she could convey, in her palm, all that medicine had failed to restore. Carlos was outside, his back resting on the wall and his face buried in his hands. It was as if time had retreated, turned to the edge of the abyss. At the farm, at the same time, Hercules howled. "No MUI. You are Rava." A gross, deep sound that echoed through the fields like a dry thunder, waking up Godot and scaring the other animals. His Elijah ran to the corral with the flashlight in his hand, and the heart fired. The bull walked in circles, the dirty chick of the earth, beating the hooves tightly to the ground as if he wanted to dig, escape, break any distance. "He's calling her," Godot said, his voice embargoed. "It's feeling." And that's when Elijah made a decision that had never considered: open the truck. Godot hesitated. But what if he opened? Godot? This animal needs to go. He knows where he has to be. And in less than an hour, Hercules was boarded in a makeshift vehicle with the dark sky witnessing the beginning of a path that was not in GPS, the path of instinct. Juliana barely noticed the buzz at the reception when the truck parked in front of the hospital. The security guards tried to stop. Nurses and doctors appeared at stir. "Are you crazy? This is a hospital." But Elijah went straight, she called. And he came. The confusion increased. An administrative director threatened to call the police. And then something almost supernatural happened. Clear, unconscious so far, whispered. The accompanying nurse ran to her mother. She said, "He arrived." Juliana widened her eyes. "Like this," she said, her eyes closed. "She. You know." And at that moment, all rules, protocols, and norms fell. Because the miracle was there, waiting for permission to enter. They managed to take Hercules to the hospital's inner courtyard, a garden between corridors that was rarely used. The bull, even hectic on the way, calmed down as soon as he stepped there. It didn't religious, it didn't run. It just got still. Godot held the rope, but it was unnecessary. Elijah, with tears in his eyes, said in a low voice, "He didn't come to be seen. He came to call back who's going." And then Juliana, with authorization from the most sensitive to the inexplicable doctors, took Clara, still connected to wires and tubes, to the garden. And there, in front of the real girl as a living stone, the girl's eyes opened. She didn't smile, did not speak, but he reached out, the same one that once touched the muzzle of that bull as if he touched his life. And Hercules bent down as he always did. He leaned against the sheet that covered the fragile body. The heart machine stabilized. The beats, which they once faltered, returned to a constant pace. An absolute silence fell over everyone there. And then Clara whispered, "I heard. You called me. I came back." And that night, in the center of a hospital accustomed to the logic of pain, the miracle became again, not to prove, but to remember. The days that followed the reunion in the hospital courtyard were wrapped in a reverent silence. Neither did the doctors dare to explain. Clara's exam numbers, which had been falling like an inverted hourglass, stabilized were inexplicably. The fever ceased. The breath returned to the normal pace. The girl, who was once suspended between life and absence, now smiled lightly when she woke up. There was no talk on the rise, but it was no longer talking about death. And everything seemed to find a new axis until the 7th day. The day the fence was challenged. It was late afternoon. The golden light crossed the window glass and landed over Clara, which insisted on sitting in the wheelchair to see the garden. Juliana, always next door, pushed slowly, while Carlos, quieter than ever, watched her daughter's gesture as if to keep him in millimeters of eternity. Hercules remained in a makeshift surroundings in the courtyard, isolated by security measures imposed by the hospital, albeit reluctant. He ate little, drank little, seemed to wait. Clara also expected, but no one knew what. Until that afternoon, Clara suddenly stopped and said, "He can't take it anymore." Juliana thought she was a metaphor, but Clara stared at the bull. His eyes not flashed. And then, as if obeyed a command that no one heard, Hercules raised his head, once hit the shells on the floor, and ran. It was not a wild impulse. It was something that looked much more, an invisible breach of arrest. The bull advanced straight, and with a force that challenged his age and size, jumped the improvised fence. Did not destroy. Jumped. As who crosses a line drawn by hands that do not understand what they have separated. The screams emerged, nurses, security guards, patients. But he did not advance. Just walked, with dignity, even Clara. The world seemed to hold the air. Hercules stopped before the wheelchair. Clara reached out. He lowered his head. And then she, with her mother's help, got up. The trembling, fragile legs sustained it for seconds that seemed eternal. The head resting on his neck. The calm breath. There were no applause. There was no cry. There was absolute silence. And when Juliana tried to approach, Clara said with firm sweetness, "Now it's just me and him." And at that moment all the fences fell, those of fear, those of medicine, those of skepticism. Because there, before the eyes of the world, the impossible was standing and hugged. Juliana has always been the wall. Since the first altered exam, going through the cold rooms of hospitals, the nights in course, the muffled hiccups in silent bathrooms, it remained standing. Because a mother, he said to herself, has no right to fall when her son is still struggling to get up. She was the one who turned pain into a smile, who cleaned her daughter's forehead sweat and at the same time hiding her own fear at the bottom of her eyes. It was the rock, the living prayer, the bridge between Clara and the world. But at that moment, there, before the daughter standing, supported by a bull who had jumped the laws of nature, Juliana couldn't stand it anymore. She fell to her knees. Literally. The legs failed as if the body said, "Now I can fall." The hands covered the face but did not stop crying. It was not a contained, beautiful, or poetic weeping. It was a disorderly, ancestral cataract that came from the bowels. He cried for everything, for the nights he thought he would lose Clara, the harsh words of Carlos who had to swallow, at the time he pretended hope not to break his daughter, and especially for the miracle before his eyes, which was too big to fit her without overflowing. He cried because hope had come true. And she finally could collapse. Carlos knelt next door, trying to hold his shoulders, but Juliana trembled as those who expel years of accumulated pain. She's alive, she repeated, between sobs as if to convince her own heart that she wasn't a dream. The medical team, speechless, just watched. Many cried too. Nurses hugged. One of the doctors, skeptical until then, has moved discreetly with teary eyes. And Clara, firm next to Hercules, just smiled. "Mom, you can cry now. I'm already here." And that phrase was the final liberation. Because, for the first time in years, Juliana cried not with fear, but of relief. And then, after the cry, the silence came. Sweet silence like the one who succeeds a great storm. Juliana lifted her face, sweaty and wet, and saw Clara standing, with the light of the afternoon giving her thin hair, and Hercules beside her, serene. The image was more than real. It was sacred. And finally she murmured, with a trembling smile, "Thank you for returning my daughter back. And for allowing me to fall. Because sometimes, Mr. Victor, the greatest gesture of strength is to be able to undo when, finally, life begins to recompose." Clara's image standing, supported by Hercules in the hospital's inner courtyard, circulated around the world in less than 24 hours. A nurse registered the moment with the mobile phone, and even before any official authorization, the video was already in the largest news portals in the country, crossing oceans, reaching international broadcasters, alternative medicine forums, universities, and spiritual groups. It was impossible to deny what was seen. The girl who weeks before had been declared a terminal was standing, smiling, arms around an animal that had crossed fences literal and metaphorical to find her. The first to react were the skeptics on duty. It's montage. It's marketing. This is emotional exploitation. But the medical records were available. The exams, unquestionable. The dates clear. The medical records and independent reports confirmed everything. There was no fraud. There was no staging. And then the studies began. Foreign universities contacted the medical team. One of them, in Kyoto, proposed a joint project on biointeration between humans and large mammals. Another in Munich offered scholarships to study the clear case as an immune phenomenon. Even who has issued a cautious note mentioning the importance of investigating with rigor and empathizes cases of spontaneous healing associated with animal emotional bond. Dr. Cesar Dantas, the researcher of emotional bioenergy theory, was invited to a world conference in Lisbon. It presented the collected data, the cardiac synchrony charts between Clara and Hercules, the thermal and electromagnetic records, the girl's immune response patterns. At the end of the lecture, no one applauded immediately. The silence was absolute, as if everyone there they knew they were facing something that did not fit the academic molds. And then a Swedish researcher who had lost her son to a leukemia said aloud, "If you need to call it science to respect what happened, then it is. But the real name of it is love." And the entire auditorium got up in applause. Meanwhile, on the farm, Juliana watched everything on television with fixed eyes and breath contained. It didn't smile, did not celebrate, just watched. Because, deep down, he knew that their story, from her, of Clara, of Hercules, no longer belonged to them. Now it was from the world, of collective astonishment, of the debate between faith and reason. And yet, a part of his remained untouched the day Clara whispered, in the middle of the dawn, still with feverish eyes, "Mom, I think he fixed me inside." That would never be scientific matter. It would never fit any thesis. But it was true. And sometimes the truth doesn't want to be proven, just protected. Clara knew. You didn't need to do the doctors to say, even if your mother confirmed with a restless look. The body was stronger, it is true. The exams showed signs of recovery. But there was a tiredness inside her, not the tiredness of the disease, but of the soul. A type of exhaustion that it is not about remedies, which comes after surrendering to life and gets back a miracle. The girl, with deeper eyes than her age would allow, realized that something inside her had fulfilled what needed to be done, and felt it was time to return. That morning she asked to go to the farm one last time. The hospital gave way, and under medical supervision it was taken with all the structure it deserved, but without fuss. Only her, the parents, Guido, and her Elijah. The path, already so well known, seemed different that time. Clara was looking out the window with a half smile like goodbye to lightness. Clara left at a serene dawn, months after that last hug. It was not a tragic moment. There was no rush, no screams. She simply fell asleep slowly as who just closes her eyes on her lap. His body, though still fragile, was clean from the disease, but the heart had already fulfilled what he had done. The doctors said it was sudden heart failure. But Juliana knew. Carlos knew. Guido and Elias too. Clara had not left because she was weak. She left because she was complete. At the funeral, there was no crowd. The family opted for an intimate ceremony in the field next to the farm where Clara always said that the sky seemed closer. It was buried under a tree that she herself called the Guardian of Stars. In the coffin, they put a drawing made by her, she and Hercules, lying on the grass with a star between the two. A single star, golden, with a smile drawn in the center. Silence dominated the environment until the moment the last handful of land was launched, a deep mute echoed from a distance. Hercules stopped at the top of the hill, stared at the horizon. It didn't approach, did not make a scene, just stayed, like an eternal sentry. After the match, the farm became a sanctuary or tourist attraction. Your Elias kept your doors closed. But once a year, the same day Clara hugged Hercules for the first time, children from an orphanage are taken to the field. Not to seek miracles, but to touch the earth, draw on the floor, and hear stories. And there, before the tree where Clara rests, they learn something that is not in the books, that love, when true, does not die, changes shape. And it turns into wind, flower, silence, or even an old bull that is still slowly walking, but sometimes to lift the neck and face the sky as if it recognizes someone. Hercules lived 2 more years. He died on a cold morning, lying under the same tree. It was buried next to Clara. In place, Elias planted a change of white-eyed. And over time, the place earned a name that was not made official by any authority, but whispered by those who passed there, the field of those who embraced. Today, whoever walks around finds no statues, no gold plates. Just trees, wind, and the distant sound of the pasture. But paying attention, with a clean heart and eyes tightly closed, you can swear you hear a girl laughing in the distance. And a bull sighing back.